Geronimo van Arken, artistically known as Hieronymus Bosch or simply Bosch, was one of the most mysterious and brilliant artists of the Renaissance. This aura of mystery is partly due to the complexity and enigmatic nature of his work, which has led to various interpretations, most of which are academically justified. In approaching his work, it becomes clear to those familiar with the subject matter that Bosch was at least somewhat acquainted with esoteric knowledge and concepts, which was quite common among Renaissance artists. Bosch's paintings are intentionally intriguing. His art was unique, not only because of his great technical skill, but also because he was a profound thinker and his metaphors were masterfully, poetically beautiful, albeit highly complex. However, they are not as impossible to understand as commonly believed, at least in general terms. It is important to clarify that interpretation is always subjective, and the interpretation we will present today is as valid as any other. However, Bosch seems to have left a fairly clear path of symbolic messages so that an attentive observer familiar with the key could access their second reading. In The Garden of Earthly Delights, Bosch carefully exposes the difference between humanity's inner life and its external, material, and temporal life. He seems to particularly address the influence of both the divine and the mundane on humanity. The painting is composed to speak to everyone, not just a hidden group. It is broad and universal, yet rich in hidden symbolism. So why not analyze it semiotically in an esoteric key, which is what you all came to hear? Let's see what ideas Bosch had about humans, the earth, the sky, weaknesses, virtues, etc. These ideas, as you will see, reflect much of the ancient esoteric traditions found scattered across a wide variety of schools, currents, and groups. As you can imagine, it would be almost impossible to analyze the painting completely, as each of the hundreds of figures and actions that compose it has meaning. So, we will discuss the concept and general keys to reading the work, and we will highlight the points that I personally find most interesting. Therefore, everyone is also invited to help me in the comments with metaphors or allegories that I may have overlooked, as I certainly do not claim to know them all, not by a long shot. In this marvelous painting, Bosch composes an ambiguous enigma that seems to demand intuition and intellectual effort from the observer. Unlike the typical scenes from biblical or standard Christian representations of the time, this image is made from the substance of dreams and visions. It is designed to prevent any usual reading because it presents a fantastic world that sounds completely and absolutely human. Only by exploring and resolving the contradiction can one begin to understand it. From the beginning, the work indicates that it is not representing an objective or physical reality. Bosch describes an absolutely internal landscape which could conceptually be compared to Carl Jung's collective unconscious. Internal processes seem to be an essential part of the work. The closer they get to the material, the further they move away from the spiritual. The Garden of Earthly Delights, actually the Garden of Temptations, shows the human mind tempted in every possible way by the external, generally represented by the sensual and the information brought through the senses and the body. It is very interesting that Bosch composed a new visual language for this, departing from the traditional esoteric schools that taught through symbolic images. He reinvented this language ingeniously, taking the allegorical alchemical techniques so popular among the intellectual elite of his time and applying them to fine art. In a way, he can be considered the first surrealist, 4 centuries before that movement existed. It is important to note that nothing is left to chance. Everything has an order and a reason for being. For example, the entire work, when viewed as a whole, presents a vertical order that expresses the idea that humans have a vertical internal structure of architectural symmetry. The left panel seems to represent divine influences, and the right panel earthly influences. Thus, the central main panel is the terrain of interaction between the divine and the material, the field of manifestation. Generally, this painting is thought to be read from left to right and from top to bottom, except for the right panel, where everything is inverted. So, let's try to follow that order. There is another very particular key that I want to share with you to understand the painting, and it is the treatment of the color palette, where each color has a symbolic value specific to the triptych. To keep it from being too complex, I will focus only on the 5 most important: pink, blue, ochre, white, and red. Pink is used to represent divine influences. It is the color of the highest. Bosch gives the clue when he paints God's garments in this color, at least in the left and central panels. In the right panel, where everything is deceptive, it is used to identify figures that try to create the illusion of being divine or beneficial, while they are the opposite. It is important to clarify that in this right panel, there is nothing good. On the contrary, blue represents the other extreme. It represents the lowest level, that of material manifestations and earthly influences. This dichotomy between pink and blue seems to have the following logic. Pink is a warm, lively color, so Bosch uses these qualities to symbolize internal life, while blue, being a cold color, is used for the exterior, for the material. Elements that combine both colors represent an intersection of internal and external influences, and you will see this a lot in the painting. On the other hand, ochre symbolizes the mental aspect, sometimes the divine mental aspect, deep and sometimes human, represented in intelligence and consciousness, and the darker the tone, the lower or more negative the influences acting on the mind. White represents the sacred and the pure, except again in the right panel, where everything is false and deceptive, and where there are figures that appear to be sacred but are not really. When in the painting, for example, we see a white figure stained with blue, it represents something pure being corrupted by low influences. Finally, red is used to represent lust, passion, that is, the cherry on top, temptation. Another very interesting aspect is that when the triptych is closed, the 3 panels become one, and in this external stage, they represent the image of an internal world in shades of grey inside a transparent sphere. It is assumed that this fragile and illusory microcosm represents the 3rd day of creation. At the top, there is a phrase almost numerologically extracted from Psalm 33:9. For he spoke, and it came to be, he commanded, and it stood firm. If we start from the left panel at the top, we find the sacred mountain painted in ochre for the mental plane and in green for fertility, from which a spiral of birds emerges to its right, almost as if it were a comparison. There are a series of blue mountains that degrade from the brightest sight, where the sacred mountain is, to the last small and gloomy one. This one symbolizes the earth. One can even see the moon, which Bosch represents with 2 opposing discs crossed by a translucent branch, perhaps suggesting 2 polarities united by the invisible laws of nature. The 2 intermediate mountains would represent intermediate worlds or realities, and according to the painter's Christian understanding, possibly the world of archangels and the world of angels. The central fountain, painted in pink, represents the flow of divine energy from the highest levels of heaven to the lowest of material reality, represented in blue. The entire central part of this panel represents creation. From the circular base, an owl, symbolizing divine wisdom, stares intently at the pile of jewels emerging from the materialization of these energies. There are jewels of all symbolic colors, symbolizing diversity and therefore choice. And perhaps that is why the owl is looking judiciously, discerning between good and bad from the waters of life. There are real and mythological animals living in the waters, which we will later see in the circle of the central panel. To the right of the fountain, we see a cave, shaped like a head, its upper part holding the tree of knowledge with the coiled serpent, symbolized in this case by a palm tree, a reference to an Eastern origin. This section seems taken from a painting by Dali. Although it is probably the other way around, it is more below, after creation, that we see a figure symbolizing God but with a very similar aspect to Christ. Bosch possibly referred to the Word of God, as this figure presents Eve to a surprised Adam, representing humanity. Their hands are in a very obvious position. The one above is represented with the hand making the sign of benediction, and the one below with the hand introducing Eve, who probably symbolizes human conscious nature. Remember the hand making the benediction, the Word of God, because we will find it later corrupted in the right panel. Finally, to the left of Adam, we see one of the most beautiful trees of life ever depicted, which, if inverted, forms an emanationist scheme where everything converges into one. In the central panel, the symbolic play of colors is very well appreciated in the central fountain and the towers and mountains that surround it. The pink tower just next to the left panel, after a series of interactions between influences, ends in a blue tower with a bit of deceptive pink next to the right panel. The central fountain symbolizes the incarnation of the divine into the human and is represented in a rather problematic situation where the predominant color is blue and what remains of pink is turning red. In the middle of the central panel, we can see how everything revolves around a large circle that recalls the wheel of life, the dynamics of the ether, the Ouroboros, and similar esoteric concepts. If you look closely among the animals, you may even find a zodiacal wheel, as many of the signs are there. This circle incorporates the symbolism of a wide range of real and mythological animals and their procession, along with humanity, suggesting a connection with nature, but also pointing out the secret symbols of higher levels veiled beneath the forms of the animal world. In this section of the work, with a little imagination, one can appreciate one of the best graphical representations of what Jung called the collective unconscious and its extensive repertoire of archetypal characters. In the center of the circle, a group of virgins represents a pure internal nature, separated from the parade of external influences and seemingly waiting for something. The virgins wear symbolic elements on their heads. This could have infinite interpretations, but in the alchemical tradition of the time, black crows symbolized the nigredo, white birds the albedo, and red apples the fruit of wisdom, the rubedo. These were the three great phases or basic phases of the chemical transmutation process, and this is hardly accidental because it is the only place where Bosch does not use the color symbolism that he prints in the rest of the work. Further down, we see how temptation dominates the earth. The senses succumb to distractions, but to the right, a mysterious figure indicates the necessary action to navigate through the temptations. It has 5 cherries of temptation, but carries them symmetrically, balanced with the right measure. Its torso is a pink egg, that is divine, and its head an owl, the animal of Athena Minerva, the goddess of wisdom. In its arms, there is a branch representing nature in perfect balance. It is often considered Bosch's version of Vitruvian Man, a motif that encompasses a major arcanum. Leonardo da Vinci said that the human body is an analogy of the functioning of the universe, and in this case, Bosch reinvents this motif in a new and extraordinary way, crowned by wisdom and protected by a divine shell. Clarifying for those who may not know, this motif does not belong to Da Vinci or Bosch. It was composed by Marcus Vitruvius Pollio, the leader of the Roman Builders' Union in the 1st century BC and personal architect of Julius Caesar. Regarding the right panel, we won't beat around the bush. Things are terribly wrong because powers and influences have not been managed correctly. People are devoured or killed due to the lack of attention to the spiritual qualities of their origins. In this panel, Bosch deploys a wealth of esoteric symbols. They seem more like images from a tarot deck than what one would expect to find in a painting of supposed Catholic inspiration. Many images are so obvious that they barely need explanation for those who study inner evolution. Nevertheless, we will still point out the most notorious ones. It can be interpreted that the lower part corresponds to the earth, the center to purgatory, and the upper part to hell, of course, in symbolic terms. One of the first things we see in the earth section is the hand of benediction, the divine word that appeared on the left panel, but here it is nailed with a dagger to a blue disc, immobilizing the divine in humans against the slab of a tomb, assigning the course of existence to mere chance. The chaotic crowd behind the slab represents the many selves in man. Observe that they are all the same person. Only if he awakens can he live. If he remains asleep, he becomes prey to the earthly forces that feed on him. We also find a man who, unable to identify the higher influences within himself, resorts to the false external ones that deceive him, taking advantage of his desperation and need, whose operative instruments are deformed machines that force him to sign commitments. Above, there is a section often called the Symphony of Human Judgment, where a man is played like the strings of a harp. Being in this panel, it can be interpreted as an instrument where only the notes of earthly life are played, and where this man is not the performer but a vehicle for the transmission of low vibrations. He is bound to the instruments of life by a snake. The snake represents the inner energies that, when dominated, are liberating, but in this case, the undominated ones bind him to a destiny where life goes by in a score. There is also a demon-like judge, but who is disguised with a pink robe, spitting lies whose value is as worthless as a score written on a buttock. Perhaps this symbolizes the illusion of believing to know divine truths. Another point of interest is the iconic creature with a bird's head seated on a throne, devouring people and excreting them into a sewer within blue bubbles. We already know what the color blue represents. Indeed, the creature is blue. The individual is swallowed by the material, transforming all that is good into waste. We can also see next to the sewer how the gluttonous and the avaricious pay their faults. To the left of the throne, we see a female figure that symbolizes the unconscious human nature, represented in the left panel by Eve, and in the central panel by the virgins in the center of the wheel, in both cases under divine influence, but here she is asleep, nullified in an almost comatose state. If we continue upwards, we leave the world of the living and encounter the river Styx, the river of the dead, but it is frozen. No ferryman meets the dead to carry them to the underworld. On the contrary, they are alone, skating on thin ice, and some sinking into the dark waters. Higher up in the purgatory section, there is another of the iconic elements of the painting that contains the most powerful argument for esoteric interpretations of the piece, like the understanding or lack thereof of humans of their own inner condition. It is a man with his gaze turned backward, concentrating on the figure that traverses his body, making it clear what he normally focuses his mind on his body, and above his head, on the mental plane, a round of thought develops. But his attention is not on the music of the divine bagpipe, on the superior influences trying to send him a message. It raises the question of what we are thinking about and where we are going. Submerged in the center of chaos, he has concerned himself with earthly things and not with paying attention to his higher nature, which is perpetually trying to reach him, but cannot do so due to his distractions. This scene seems to deal with awakening, seeing what we are instead of looking the other way. Above this, the owners of the ears that have not heard the word delve into the darkest territory of the painting, the furthest removed from divine influences, and which is represented with the same hell. Finally, the Garden of Earthly Delights is a painting in which the artist exposes his point of view, closer to the mystical or esoteric than to the orthodox, on the interaction between divine energy and earthly life. Dozens and dozens of metaphors create a giant allegory of this vision, where the scarce presence of traditionally Catholic images indicates that this vision of the painter, although rooted in the Christian understanding of the time, extended to a much broader realm. That said, I remind you that it would be a great contribution to this community for those who have more readings on the work to have the generosity to share them in the comments. Lastly, I'd like to remind you that you have this and many other historical paintings available on our website. There, you can find fine art prints and canvases so you can have a reproduction of your favorite artwork in your home. I myself have ensured that the quality is the most faithful to the original piece, and we offer free worldwide shipping. So, if you want to support the channel and also decorate your home with a painting like this, don't hesitate to visit our website. Thank you very much for watching the video, and we'll see you in the next one.